And greetings. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand. Blaze TV, here, radio, podcast. I'm Steve Deace alongside Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. Thank you to all of you. Hello to Todd and Aaron. We are brought to you today by our friends over at Hillsdale College. They are the great American college with a huge and effective educational outreach effort on behalf of liberty. They're giving away free copies of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence leading up to the election here next month. It's part of their immediate goal to put constitutions in the hands of 1 million Americans who don't have one. And if you have one already, you can order another for a young person you know who does not. But this offer is only good for a limited time. So claim your free pocket-sized Constitution today at daceforhillsdale.com, F-O-R, daceforhillsdale.com to have a free copy mailed to you. Visit daceforhillsdale.com right now. Fill out a simple form. They'll put it in the mail for you with free shipping at daceforhillsdale.com. Also coming up here, we have a brand new subscription product at The Blaze as we are expanding our offerings. It's called Blaze TV Unlimited. All right. And this gives you an opportunity now to take part in being a founding member in this tier by also getting our new Frontier magazine with articles from the great one, Mark Levin, the Hall of Famer, Glenn Beck, Chris Rufo, maybe America's most effective activist, and more. And this also gives you even more access to The Blaze behind the scenes content, event access as well. So if you want to be a founding member here to Blaze Unlimited and join there, go to blazeunlimited.com/Deace to claim your spot. But don't wait. Founding member spots are limited. blazeunlimited.com/Deace. That's blazeunlimited.com/Deace. All right, coming up here at the bottom of the hour, we're going to talk to a priest who has written a book on the theology of horror. That seems pretty timely given what we're seeing in the culture, but also given the time of year. Next hour, we are going to have Theology Thursday as we pick up our study of the book of Romans, verse by verse, Paul's important, vital letter to the church there and to the church everywhere for all time. But before we begin all of that, let us begin, as we always do, with Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by Landfall. Hurricane Milton made landfall in Florida yesterday evening as a weakened but still powerful Category 3 storm. As of this morning, more than 3 million power outages were reported across the impacted areas of western and central Florida, with 600,000 people's power already being restored. The high winds ripped the roof off of Tropicana Field, where hundreds of linemen staged to get ready for the aftermath were sheltered. Milton tracked across the entirety of Florida overnight and now is out to the Atlantic Ocean, with conditions ranging from high winds to storm surge expected to improve as the day goes on. Of course, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis continues to deal deftly with the latest emergency and fend off the continued narrative created by Kamala Harris. Here he is on CNBC this morning.
I am working with the President of the United States. I'm working with the Director of FEMA. I'm marshaling all my state assets. We've been doing this now nonstop for over 2 weeks between Helene and this. And so if there's anything I can leverage to benefit my people, I'm going to do it. The fact of the matter is they put out a story saying I didn't even know she was trying to reach me, but she has no role in this process. And I've been dealing with these storms in Florida under both Trump and Biden. Neither of them ever politicized it. And in fact, all the storms I've dealt with under this administration, although I've worked well with the president, she has never called in Florida. She has never offered any support. So what she's doing is she's trying to inject herself into this because of her political campaign. So as the governor here who's leading this, I don't have time for those games. I don't care about her campaign. Obviously, I'm not a supporter of hers, but she has no role in this process. And so I'm working with the people I need to be working with. We're leveraging the resources I need to be leveraging. And for her to try to say that my focus should be on catering to her rather than worrying about my own people just shows she doesn't understand what it means to respond to these natural disasters.
Moving on, the inflation rate moved up to 2.4% in September, beating expectations. Initial filings for unemployment benefits also took an unexpected turn higher, hitting as seasonally adjusted 258,000 for the week ending in October 5th. That's the highest total since August 5th of 2023. At a Democrat fundraiser in California at California Governor Gavin Newsom's home in Sacramento, Democrat VP hopeful Tim Walz told donors, quote, "I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go. We need a national popular vote." Walz went on to lament how that's not the country we live in, so he needs donor money to win via the Electoral College. The Kamala Walz campaign went on to issue a statement to media saying it's not the position of the campaign that the Electoral College needs to be abolished. LOL, end quote. Kamala was on some meaningless Zoom call with FEMA administrators yesterday when this happened.
Flood, we really got to watch those areas and those communities. So it takes quite a while for that water to drain.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Ken, I have a question for you. You mentioned words matter, and
for those of you listening, Harris covered her mouth, looks off camera, and says it's a live broadcast before asking another panelist a question she was fed from one of her staffers. Also, I can't go this entire week without talking about what 60 Minutes polled the other night. They sliced and diced their interview with Kamala Harris to smithereens. Here's the most egregious example. On the topic of Israel and Netanyahu, you already heard this clip on the montage this week. This is the unedited version.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
And here's the version 60 Minutes aired.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
In case you weren't paying close attention, CBS News took her answer from a completely different question and spliced it into the answer to the question that was asked. And the kicker is, it didn't really make her look that much more articulate or smart. Moving on, today is the 10th day of the 10th month, or XX in Roman numerals, also known as Real Women's Day. The pro-female athletics brand XXXY Athletics released this bomb of a commercial calling out Nike for supporting men who feel pretty, destroying female sports.
Dear Nike.
Dear Nike.
Dear Nike. Why won't you stand up for me?
Why won't you stand up for me? Why won't you?
Why do you claim to support women and girls?
Yet when we need you most,
you remain silent.
Today, males are claiming our identity,
our sports,
our spaces.
Men and boys are stealing opportunities, medals, trophies, and our future.
It is not fair or just.
In fact, it's often dangerous. Yet you refuse to use your platform to stand up.
You say you're for social justice and progress.
So why do you allow men's rights to come before ours? See, with a big platform
comes an even bigger responsibility.
You have a chance to do the right thing,
not just do the easy thing.
So we're asking you, Nike.
So we're asking you, Nike.
So we're asking you, Nike.
As the biggest voice in all of sports.
Will you stand up for me? Will you stand up for me?
Will you stand up for me? Will you stand up for me? Will you?
Will you?
Will you just do it?
And finally, Donald Trump appeared on comedian Andrew Schultz's podcast yesterday and was asked about how to parent children when you're wealthy and famous.
So I do have good kids and 5 really wonderful children and different, very different. They are so different. But, you know, one thing that was in common that I did, I always used to say when I was with them or when they were leaving a room, I would drive them crazy. No drugs. No alcohol, no cigarettes. I would say that.
Did you say that to Don Jr.?
Yeah, Don's a little wild. He's a wild. He can be a little tough.
He told me a funny story.
Go ahead.
Okay. I talked to a bunch of people. I was trying to, prepare for this interview. Right. He told me a funny story. And he said to me, he goes, once he asked if he could have a couple of his friends over for New Year's. Was it New Year? No, it was July 4th.
Right.
On top of Trump Tower.
Right.
And you said yes. He's like, I want 5 friends. You're like, okay, I'm out of town. Go for it. He brings 200 people over to Trump Tower. Okay?
That's right.
Okay. He says that you weren't supposed to be there. You end up showing up. You hear some noise upstairs. You come up. You go, what the is everybody doing here? Get the hell out of my house. He said he cleaned for the next 36 hours. And he said, to this day, you have never brought up that it even happened. And he said, I'm starting to believe it might not have happened. So can you give him closure?
No, it happened. No, I can never give closure.
And that's what happened while we were away.
I've been saying this repeatedly. Whoever came up with the idea of putting him on these long form podcasts was a stroke of genius. And, for those of us that are, and I mean, the level of public eye I am in is nothing compared to his. He was already one of the most famous men in the world before he got elected president of the United States. But for those of us that are in the public eye and operate in some form of exposure publicly for a living or regularly as a byproduct of what we do for a living, the question always is how much of this is a real person and how much of this is an act, and what I found, so just putting myself out there for a second, what I have found over the years is that I used to have, early in my radio career, my program directors and stuff were adamant I'm better on my own. What I found, though, and this is why when I broke away and started my own company and went out on my own, I never did this on my own. I hired people that I knew and I trusted to work with me from the very beginning and to be on the air. Because what I found is that I struggle to resist the temptation. I mean, hell, I struggle to resist this temptation when I have a team, let alone than when I don't. But I really struggle when there's no one else to talk. I really struggle with the temptation of sermonizing rather than broadcasting. And they're two different things, by the way. They are two different things. Okay. And one is a product of a narrow road, and the other is very difficult to broadly do, right? I mean, I'm already trying to do something really hard for a living here, taking a very narrow worldview that literally self-describes itself as a narrow road and then broadly broadcast it. And then I needed other people that would bring out the other interests and aspects of my personality so that it wouldn't just be an ideologue all of the time. It would, and that's exasperating. It exhausts people. And if you know me personally, there are other aspects of my personality where I'm not ideologuing and monologuing and sermonizing all of the time, so that I could relate to the audience better and grow that relationship more. And that's why when I broke out on my own, I went against what my previous program directors, whose opinions on many things I respected, but on this one I disagreed, and wanted to make sure I had people with me that would bring out the broader aspects of my personality so we could appeal, because my worldview is going to narrow the audience potential all on its own. So hopefully we have other aspects of my personality that'll appeal more broadly so that we're not just self-limiting our content and that we do all the time. And I bring that up because one of the, and if you were listening to our show at that time, and I know a lot of you weren't, looking at our growth of the show here over the last 5 years, a lot of you that are with us right now were not with us then. Okay. And so some of you have heard me talk about getting approached by Trump as early as 2013, him calling me out of the blue, him spending well over a year wooing me, eventually offering me a chance to, get on the ground floor of his presidential campaign. So how did I end up being one of the very first people to take his campaign seriously, to then being part of Free the Delegates and fighting him so vehemently in his first run? And I've talked about this before, but one of the key things I really struggled with was the Donald Trump you see in these podcasts. That is the guy that I communicated with for about 2 years. The insult machine, and the other things. Not that I'm necessarily opposed to that, but it got unhinged. Like I remember one time he did a rally in Iowa where Ben Carson for the first time took over a polling lead against Trump in the 2016 caucus polling, and Trump went on some like crazed rant about him beating his mom or lying about his past. I don't even know what it was about. I remember watching that at the time thinking, what the hell is that? I really struggled because the persona, the aspects of his persona that has turned a lot of Americans off who I think would otherwise have been very supportive of his policies. For 2 years, I never saw that. The guy you see in these podcasts This is the guy I communicated with for 2 years. I mean, I used to just tell him to his face, you're the most likable narcissist I've ever met. And we haven't seen a lot of this persona in public over the last, what now? Most of his presidential term, we didn't see it. I mean, I don't know that we've seen a lot of it since 2016, except for the last few months when he's done these podcast interviews. And I think also putting him in audiences that are not traditionally our base, right? So some of you that are like hardcore ideologues like me are like, why do you bring up sports sometimes? Why do you do a pop culture segment? Why do you talk about movies? Again, it's broadcasting. And in many respects, the former president is broadcasting too. He's trying to reach as wide of an audience as he possibly can, in spite of the fact he represents a party that half the country disagrees with. Then there's people that don't like his personality. This is bringing out other aspects of his persona that, unless you've spent personal time with him at any point in his celebrity life, you've just never seen. I mean, I would imagine that clip of him talking about parenting his son and his son taking advantage of him and making him clean that place for 36 hours, but then never bringing it up again. I can imagine, like, guys, a focus group of like 20 suburban moms watch that and like looking at each other like, is this even the same person? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a total, like that is not in our mind's eye the imprint of Donald Trump that is etched there, that is carved there. And this is making him way more likable. And I really struggled with, which was the real guy, the guy, with the antics, the guy that I got to know. And I really struggled with that.
And rightly so, by the way. Rightly so. I mean, you shouldn't be apologizing for that, and I don't think you are. But
because since he had, and then since he had no issue record,
exactly.
Right.
This is where
I don't know if he's conning my own base. Right. There's a history of the church of people conning the church. I don't know if anybody's read a book on church history and got past the copyright page, but there's a history of this, and there's a great big future of it coming too, by the way. Okay. So I saw a very relatable guy whose life I could not relate to, but whose persona I could. What you see in these podcasts is what I was exposed to for about 2 years. And it's what made it so hard, despite the fact he had no record on the issues. It's what made it so hard for me at first to walk away and say, I just don't think I can trust him on the issues. And then we get into the broader campaign, and now I'm seeing an aspect of his persona I've just never seen. And you've never seen this ever, really, in his celebrity life. And now he has no record, and I'm thinking, where's the real Donald Trump here? And then, of course, once he gets into office, he does a way better job, pre-COVID anyway, way better job than I would have envisioned, a legit good job on multiple fronts. And so now in the end, it's about policies more than personalities to me, always. But when he had no policies, then I have nothing left but personality. But in this case, he is making himself more accessible to people and voters than has ever been done before. And guys, I do think doing these long form interviews is an absolute stroke of genius. And he should continue doing them, even if he gets elected, even as president, he should continue doing them.
And who listens to a lot of these interviews, whether it's Theo Vaughn or Andrew Schultz, it's young men.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's helpful. I want to make one correction really, really quick to something I said in the montage. Tropicana Field roof being torn off that had been used to stage linemen, hundreds if not thousands of them, if I'm not mistaken. DeSantis actually moved them right before the roof got torn off. So I want to make that clarification real quick.
Okay.
If I may,
go ahead.
What Steve just said there, that's called being a grown-up. Analyzing past, present, and future, weighing and measuring, sifting. This is called, within Christian grown-up tradition, prudential judgment. We don't, on this mortal coil, we're supposed to strive as best as we can to be perfect as he is perfect, but we're not utopians. That is just sober-minded analysis. And what Steve also didn't mention within the context of making the decisions, both back then And very, very recently, we believed and still believed we had better candidates to choose from. But they didn't win. And we're grown-ups. We had a decision to make. Well, right now, we have a decision to make. I had this discussion again this morning, some with people I respect, some with people I don't. But that's what you do. Things could have been different. They weren't. Children will go home and whine about it and not try to move forward the best that they can. Again, weighing and measuring what is true, what is false, what gives us the best chance now, a week from now, a year from now, to have a say, to fight for the truth. I just think, again, Steve's done some what might be taken as understated if you don't have ears to hear. But what he just said goes along with what he said last week, which I said was one of the most important things he's ever said. Steve refuses to let Donald Trump break his brain in either directions. That is really, really important in this time.
You know, I had thank you for that, brother. I appreciate it. And I got a note. I got to know, man, like my private friend group is just dealing out content for this show this week. So thank you, guys. But one of them sent me a note today and said, because all of us in this private friend group, we all caucused for DeSantis. All of us did. And love the guy. And one of them said, you know, the thought occurred to me this morning is, you know, maybe he could have done both. We kind of talked about this a little bit the other day, but back-to-back Category 5 hurricanes in a week, back-to-back. The amount of lives in danger, the amount of property in danger, way of life in danger, you know, is it very possible that ultimately he is exactly where he needs to be right now from a Providence standpoint? And in many respects, if you go back to the 2012 election, you're watching that clip. We were talking yesterday, guys, how much of this is seeping over into the Gen Pop, right? Okay, like the slicing up of her interview with 60 Minutes that Aaron did a great job pointing out to us. How much of that is in their water table, and then how much of that is in our own feedback loop? And I don't know. But I think we, given the two completely separate, holistically separate Americas that exist right now, we have to always ask ourselves, okay, is this we're getting high on our own supply, or does this have spillover potential, not the Wuhan lab type of spillover potential, but the spillover potential of getting into their America and impacting them as well, like the failed Afghan evacuation, for example, something like that. Okay. And you stop and think about, he's the greatest crisis manager maybe I've ever seen. You know, I wasn't alive to watch the great General Omar Bradley and Patton and MacArthur and Nimitz and Eisenhower during World War II. I don't know. You know, in my lifetime, I'm 51. He's the best. He's the greatest. Ron DeSantis is the greatest crisis manager I've ever seen. But if you go back to 2012, and maybe that election which was almost as razor close all the way as this one was, and maybe at the end, Chris Christie embracing Barack Obama tilts just enough of that so we get 4 more years of that Marxist, although I really don't know that 4 years of Mitt Romney would have made much of a dent. You guys know what I think about that. But in this case, this is not Ron DeSantis talking to Sean Hannity now. This is Ron DeSantis on CNBC, which is in some, demilitarized zone, some Rhineland region between their America and our America is where CNBC exists. That tells me that this story now absolutely has some spillover potential. And he is burying her. He is absolutely burying her. And he's getting an assist from Biden. I mean, Biden's like Yari Curry on the wing there feeding Messier, okay? He has said again for the second time, I've got a great relationship with DeSantis. We've handled these things great. He said it again after we got off the air yesterday and pointed it out. But that messaging that is a haymaker. I mean, both that and the Nike ad, man, those are both absolute neutron bombs. I have no idea if that Nike ad is going to get into their water table. That I don't know. But if DeSantis is saying the stuff on CNBC that he was saying on Hannity this week, then now we're at the very least, pardon the pun here, given what's going on down there, but the water's at least up against the shore. He's at least penetrated the Rhineland demilitarized zone between their America and ours. And we talked, and Todd, you brought this up a ton, that this election is a trial of believers or a trial of Americans. I think we're also, though, going to get a trial of normies.
Oh, all of them.
Because what is the cell space where someone's basic competency for office is so extremely inept that it doesn't matter how much you don't like the other person or what particular pet causes or issues you have. You're just like, that we can't have, right? We reached that with Biden's dementia in the debate on June 27th, and that's why he's not the nominee now. They saw that too. But what's happening in these interviews, that clip there, Aaron, of her covering her mouth, oh my gosh, it's live. That clip that went viral where her teleprompter broke and she couldn't even speak for 10 seconds to hold the audience's attention while it rebooted, okay? What is the sell price where you're like, that's just no. Just simply not qualified. Ideological differences or personality grievance and angst aside, that just can't. Yeah, that's just not qualified. We have a baseline qualification here before we even get to my other preferences, right? And it appears Kamala Harris is going to push the normies on determining that. And DeSantis, by getting on CNBC and doing this, would they do that if he were the nominee? I'm not so sure. Then he would be accused of politicizing this. Now he's in a neutral zone where he has the high ground and can just absolutely prosecute her while also saving that state from another crisis as he has many times before. I don't know. I wonder if we're seeing Romans 8:28 play out and DeSantis is right where he needs to be, and then ultimately normies are getting stretched to the breaking point here. How much incompetence are you willing to tolerate before you just simply say, yeah, we just can't function as a society with this?
Listen, I'm Mr. Vinegar, and were it not for the margin of cheating, everything Steve just said would say I'm feeling that momentum too. And I wouldn't really have a problem saying if the election were held today that Donald Trump would win, because as as Steve laid out in previous elections, the margins within specific states are small enough that I think we're probably seeing enough of a swing there. So to me, ultimately, it's all about that margin of cheating and how much of it can be done in the darkness and how much of it can be done in the light, just knowing that there won't be enough time or appetite to push back against it. That's where I'm at.
I think it's entirely possible that this is exactly where DeSantis needs to be at exactly this time. I don't know if this is necessarily true or not, just perception from the outside looking in. It seems like this period of time in Florida, it has faced a lot of these types of emergencies. And what better, if you are seeing an uptick in landfall, major hurricanes, what better time than to have somebody who is an expert, like an actual expert, cool, calm, and collected, and has their stuff together in the time of an emergency. That's absolutely possibly the case. But regardless of whether this is divine providence or something else, you just cannot deny the fact that this guy is just built differently. He's just built differently. And I think the people of Florida, whether they recognize that or not, it seems like, given the results of the last election down there, they, at least enough of them recognize it. They're lucky. They're lucky to have him.
Yes, and we tried to get him hard. We didn't. It didn't work.
It shouldn't
and
be.
He's moved on.
Yep.
So listen to him, guys. If you don't want to listen to the Day Show, listen to Ron DeSantis.
Just an overall picture of life. A lot of the times you're going to look at your life and say it should not be this way, or I don't want it to be this way. Mm-hmm. But it is. Yes. It is this way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the foresight of moving that base camp, there's a reason why it's at Tropicana Field, guys. It's a massive base camp, okay? The foresight of moving that within inches of that hurricane taking that roof off, I mean, who does that? All right, back here on the Steve Deace Show, and I've got a special announcement for you guys. Pay attention. This is maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity I'd like you to join me for. Our good friend Rick Green and his organization, Patriot Academy. They built a unique firearms training program in Texas that combines handgun defense training with classroom training on the Constitution, civics, and culture. And not only is the firearms training some of the best in the nation, but you're going to get fellowship and discussion time that you get during the class. It's also refreshing. It's going to be kind of your post-election, relaxation retreat, if you will. And it's coming up November 16th through the 18th. Myself, Daniel Horowitz, our good friend, and Rick Green, all going to be hosting a special 3-day constitutional defense course at the Patriot Academy campus outside of Fredericksburg, Texas. And this is going to be the first time that all three of us have done an event together, or this particular event at all. So you can bring your spouse, kids, friends, anyone else who loves the country and likes to spend a few days discussing topics that you get to hear every time you guys tune into our podcast here on The Blaze. If you'd like to attend this class with us November 16th through the 18th, again, you can register by going to patriotacademy.com/Steve. That's patriotacademy.com/Steve. Again, hope to see you there coming up here in a little more than a month from now. patriotacademy.com/Steve. All right, the name of the book, Theology of Horror, The Hidden Depths of Popular Films, from Ryan G. Duns. He's a priest, and he's writing about horror films, and he joins us here on The Blaze. It is good to have you with us, Ryan. Thank you very much for your time, brother. How are you?
I'm well, Steve. Thank you so much for having me.
So I have an excuse. I grew up in a pagan household to a 15-year-old mom. My grandmother watched me a lot when I was a little kid, and I loved my grandma Myrna, but she was big into horror movies and the occult and all that stuff. So she got me into all this growing up, and then I remained not quite as fascinated by it after I got converted. More so from a supernatural perspective, I do think you can tell a lot about a culture by what it's scared from or by, okay? But I'm not, I'm not going to haunted houses and stuff for Halloween or any of that stuff anymore, right? But I have kind of a residual interest in this topic. What's your excuse as a priest that you want to hang out here with the devil worshipers and talk about this kind of content, brother?
So what I found as a teacher especially, that my students tend to gravitate either towards comedy or to horror as their favorite genre of film. And as a person really committed to evangelizing the students in front of me, and as a Jesuit who in some ways wanted to be a missionary to other cultures, but I don't really have the language ability, I found that I could use their interest in horror films particularly as a way of getting them to raise perennially interesting theological questions and metaphysical questions, and sort of sneak the gospel in and show them that if they are really and truly fans of the genre, they really do love horror, they're already in some way a closet metaphysician, or better, a closet theologian. And so that's what I try to do. And I'll admit, I grew up watching certainly not the torture films, Saw, Hostel, but I loved a good film. I probably, because I was raised the good Catholic boy, I thought it was transgressive, and it was my way of bucking the system a little bit. And I say in the book at one point, what I watched on Saturday night, whether it was Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees, very mild by today's standards, would in some ways occupy the same space as I heard the gospel on Sunday mornings. And so I've grown up with the genre as sort of an imaginative interlocutor throughout my life.
I remember going shortly after my conversion, and a bunch of my men's ministry buddies, we thought it'd be fun. There was a local haunted house here that was supposedly really scary, and we thought it'd be fun. And when I went as a pagan teenager, Everybody knew this stuff was fake, right? There wasn't like a subculture surrounding it. And everybody knew, frankly, if we're being brutally honest, Ryan, it was an excuse to get intimately close to a girl you liked. That's essentially what these movies were for, and we're going to the haunted houses and everything were for. Get that adrenaline going, ice break things a little bit, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, that's essentially what it was. We're all thinking with our hormones. Nobody thought this was like a subculture or a way of life. It was a means to an end. It was just you're a teenager, you're an adrenaline junkie. And I'm about 31 now, and I've been converted about a year, and we go, and a bunch of my men's ministry guys, we go to the local haunted house to check it out. And we actually never ended up going through and walking through it. We were blown away by what we saw. I mean, the kids were dressed up. The kids going through it had become a subculture. It wasn't just teenage iconoclasm, rebellion, and an excuse to engage in some neo-lusty behavior with your boyfriend or girlfriend in high school. That it was very clear that there was a buy-in to this. That there was, again, I'll use the term subculture, and you could just feel like an eeriness. I don't know how else to describe it. And we just all like ejected and checked out. Okay. Yeah. Do you say, and I used to write movie reviews for WorldNet Daily back in the day, and when they were still a thing. And I remember going to see Paranormal Activity on opening night. And that's the first time I really thought our culture was in trouble. The classic demonic possession trope, but it's the first time Hollywood did a major release in this genre where there was no minister or priest called in to save the day. In fact, the church doesn't even exist in this world. Like, they didn't even mock it. Like, it doesn't exist. And then at the end, because they're the only transcendent evil, or as you describe in your book with the term dark transcendent, which I want to talk about because I found that fascinating. The only transcendence was the darkness. And so they succumbed to it at the end. It's nihilistic. There is no sacrificial act like there is at the end of The Exorcist by a priest to save a little girl, right? And I remember walking out of there thinking, we are screwed. If this is now we've gone from secularization to, yes, there is a metaphysical world, but it's only darkness now. Now we're nihilistic. What are your thoughts on that? I know it's kind of a rambling question, but what do you think?
No, it's a great question. And I teach a lot of first-year students, and in 180 up to 240 in the lecture hall at a time. And I had a student in the middle of lecture say, well, I believe in demons, but I don't really believe in God. And I guffawed. I said, then you have one bankrupt world picture. It's incoherent. And I think that's the reason these films can be useful as teaching tools. And to your point, what you just pointed out, this is a nihilistic worldview. There's no religion, there's no divine transcendence, there's no salvation in the end. And you can hold that film up to the students and say, is this the world? Is this what your innermost longing is for? Is this what the Christian tradition teaches? Is this how human life is fated to end in screaming and being dragged into the darkness? Or is there something that enkindles a sense of hope? And, it's funny. I think you're right. I have gone to haunted houses a few times with friends, and I'm one of, I think, 40-some first cousins in our family. Lots of them are younger than me, so we've done family outings. And I have to tell you, like, it's almost, Halloween's become its own religion. I mean, certainly at Costco and Walgreens, and the rites and rituals associated with the religion that are taken very seriously, the adornments. They will dress up for a Halloween party, but certainly not for Sunday services or for Sunday Mass. And I find it interesting to engage students on that topic. Again, I insist on being able to speak a language that they will at least listen to, and then show how their inclinations and intuitions about the reality of things visible and invisible that entices them and gets them to buy movie tickets. Well, let me take that desire, that interest, and turn it on its head for them to say, I can show you a better way. But I would just also say, I've been diagnosing a lot of the issues for our young people as a crisis of interiority. And so many of them don't know how to feel. And I think the overriding fear, the yelling and the screaming, of a haunted house allows them to feel something. For me, it was annoying because it was too loud. I just didn't like the sound, and I'm not easy to scare. But I think there's a whole generation of kids that they're just desperate to feel anything. And horror is one extreme way of doing it.
Well, I mean, there's a reason why. As we were doing research for our film Nefarious and how to market it, and what we found coming out of COVID in 2021, Hollywood released 31 movies in the horror genre, and that was still with the theater, the retheatering process going slowly. In 2022, it was 35 films. So this is clearly whether they're doing it evangelistically from a dark place, or it's just purely from a commerce standpoint, or a mixture of both. There clearly is some desire in our culture right now for what you describe in your book. And of all the things I saw in your book, this is the thing I was the most fascinated by. Tell us about the term dark transcendent and why you think people need to be aware of this.
Sure. I'm going to read just one sentence from the book on, I sort of anticipated this. So I want to say, here's the thing. Horror is the only genre I know that tries to do to its viewer what the name encodes. Horror intends to horrify. So what is horror? And this is how I defined horror. It's not the best definition. It's not exhaustive. I define horror as the embodied response of an agent to the advent of a horrifying entity whose unexpected arrival creates a breach in one's known world and threatens that world with annihilation. The reason I picked the dark transcendent is if you look at the vast majority of horror films, what you're watching is the known world of the characters being violated by an outside, in supernatural films, transcendent force, demonic, diabolical, that has no desire other than to wreak havoc and overturn the current order. Mm-hmm. And what I find interesting, and that's why I look at horror films as infernal icons, dark icons. If a holy icon of Jesus, for instance, it mediates an encounter with the divine transcendent, with the Holy One, the dark transcendent turns the gaze downward and directs you into the hellscape of usually not very good horror writers' imaginations. And what I have found helpful is to talk about the dark transcendent, what lurks in the shadows, what hides underneath the bed, what scratches at the rim of the known universe, mm-hmm. is itself it's an aping image, a grotesque image of the divine transcendent, the Logos, the Word made flesh, who entered our history, entered our world in reality, not to rend our flesh, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, but to redeem it and make us whole. So in a way, I look at the hellscape of the horror movie and say, okay, a world without salvation, a world that has been populated by the dark transcendent. Now look at how the Christian narrative flips this on its head. It shows us a wholly other
or how
way
the dark transcendent is flipping the Logos narrative on its head. Right? Something is always going to rule. Something is always going to be worshipped. And so if we're not going to seek transcendence in the light, then we're going to seek it in the dark. Right. I've got about a minute here, so a point of privilege question for you.
Sure.
As I went through your book, I noticed that the two films you did not review are two movies that I actually think are the best horror films of all time. The original, The Omen, with Gregory Peck, and Hereditary. From 2018. At the very least, I think Hereditary is the best horror film that's been made so far in the 21st century. And both of them deal, obviously, with very prevalent, transcendent, spiritual, supernatural themes. So I got to only admit it. Any reason why those two films in particular didn't merit in-depth theological reviews?
Yeah, Hereditary is, I most certainly would have done that. What I found among my students is it was less well known. And at the time, when I started writing the book, I was more concerned with what I I tried to stick to movies that were about 90 minutes, and Hereditary is longer. I think The Omen is a bit longer too. And it was, I sort of figured 15 chapters, 15 films, and I tried to spread them out. And so it was by no means an insult to the importance of the films. I agree with you completely. I think Hereditary, and I even think The Witch, it has some moments too, but Hereditary is a profoundly good movie, and it gets horror and terror in the Anne Radcliffe sense really well. That film continues to freak me out. I watched it a week ago. I mean, the ending of the film. I mean, the enemy literally comes forth and says, "We are here to oppose the Trinity." Literally says that at the end of the movie. So, all right, fascinating stuff. Really thought your book was thought-provoking as I went through it this weekend, Ryan. So thank you very much, man. Appreciate it. All right, the name of the book is Theology of Horror: The Hidden Depths of Popular Films, from Father Ryan G. Duns. He's a priest. It's really a fascinating book. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. Take care.
You bet. All right, guys, what do you think of that conversation?
Oh, I love it. I love how it came about. I was just doing some homework, looking to have some question answered about a totally different matter, and the person I went to said, I know this priest who wrote this book, and listen to Steve, this is right up your alley. And I said, you bet it is. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed it, because I thought it would be perfect.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's more horrifying, Hereditary or the notion that there's an entire generation of young people who can't really feel anything, and the best opportunity they do have to feel something is horror. That is freaky. That's a commentary in and of itself, and it's not a good one. And I appreciate him pointing that out.
No doubt. And stop and think about what that means to this is the most connected generation, the most information exposed generation, the most emotionally validated generation, and yet they subconsciously are realizing it's just fraudulent. It's counterfeit.
And the themes you both presented yourself, you got a lot of pushback back when the movie was coming out from Christians, like, I can't go there, that's too demonic. Right. And you laid out, well, if you have personal problems, okay, fine. But generally speaking, said, again, we have a rated R faith. He mentioned, this is how I'm a missionary. He's absolutely right. And we're all called to be missionaries. You said as much. I'm going to this genre because that's where they are.
Yeah, I think probably the best illustration, not scariest, but probably the best illustration of what he was talking about towards the end of that conversation about the demonic counterfeit, the grotesque version of divine things, is the Upside Down from Stranger Things. That is a great illustration of what he was talking about. Not as scary as some of the other films, but a great illustration nonetheless.
Well, let's talk about the light transcendent when we come back. We will go back to the Word of God and continue our study on the book of Romans, and a very exhilarating, inspirational portion of Scripture is coming your way next. We're back here with Hour 2, live and on demand here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast, alongside Aaron McIntyre, Todd Erzin. I'm Steve Deace here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. Let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can email us that. Feedback at steve@stevedeace.com, DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. Follow me at Steve Deace Show on X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Please subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel as well, at Deace Show, at Deace Show on YouTube. If you follow the podcast version, thank you very much. Our podcast ratings are the best they've ever been in the history of our show. So thank you so much for that. Please, if you wouldn't mind, if you have yet to do this, leave us a 5-star review on the podcast platform that you prefer. And thank you to each and every one of you that have done that. You can also hit subscribe, or on iTunes, follow, and that'll make sure that each and every time we do a new episode, it will show up in your feed each and every single time. So thank you to all of you that have done that as well. And also thank you to all of you that have helped to save tens of thousands of babies via the partnership that we at the Blaze here have with Preborn. And Preborn, they are just emulating the biblical standard for persuasion. That's truth and grace. And there is never a point of persuading someone with truth that doesn't require a confrontation. Now, That confrontation doesn't necessarily, in terms of tone, have to be confrontational. Sometimes it does, but not always, right? So they don't go out there and, just start screaming at women, but they do confront them. When a woman considering the murder of her own child, when she comes into contact with preborn, she's going to be confronted. Now, it's going to be by an ultrasound that lets her hear that heartbeat, that separate heartbeat that doesn't belong to her, that isn't an unviable tissue mass. That's another person. And then if she responds to that truth and turns away from that temptation to succumb to the murder of her child out of angst or anxiety or desperation or whatever other she's confronted by that has her considering doing such a deed. Now, though, is when the grace comes in, and they are there both before and after the baby is born, prenatal care, postnatal care. All the stuff I just mentioned, by the way, they provide to the mom and the baby for free, but none of it is actually free. And that's where you and I come in with a tax-deductible donation to keep making this possible, to keep saving more and more babies. And so thank you guys so much for your generosity this year. Let's keep it going at preborn.com/Steve. That's preborn.com/Steve, or you can dial pound 250, say the keyword baby on your mobile phone, or just go to preborn.com/Steve. Well, let us continue. And I have quite a bit to say about the portion of Scripture that we're going to be talking about here this week as we continue on into Paul's letter to the church in Rome, and maybe the most epic of all his epistles. I think this is among the greatest theological essays, treatises that's ever been written in the history of our species. And we spent a good deal of time the last few weeks arguing from a Catholic Protestant perspective back and forth. Faith works, faith. What does that mean? We're going to kind of move past that now as we pick up into verse 6 in chapter 5. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. And I want to pause right there. I have talked about this verse before on Theology Thursdays of the past. But now that we're actually in this verse, I want us to contemplate what this means. All right? For while we were still weak, or while we were his enemies, some of your translations may say, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Stop and contemplate what the last part of that means. God offered up a sacrifice for those that were not worthy of it. And in many cases, we're not even seeking it. We're not even aware that they were in requirement of it. When you hear God is love, a lot of times we mean that in our own way. And so we define that love is God. No. Love is not God. God is love, and there is a difference. And it's a distinction with a massive difference. One defines the other. Because if you say that love is God, then what you determine to be loving will be your determination of what you think or who you think God is, or what he, she, or it demands of you, if anything at all. When you say God is love, though, now he is determining this. The greatest example of this is in this verse right here. What does it mean, God is love? At the right time, Christ died for the ungodly, those in opposition to God, those shaking their fist at God, those in ignorance and in darkness in relationship to God, who he is, what he requires. Those living in open opposition, not just ignorance. Those worshiping false gods or demons. Those in the midst of doing horrible things, committing terrible sins, committing generational mistakes in their marriages and families. When we say God is love, this verse is what this means. Knowing this in advance, Christ died for the ungodly. Let me put it down to just any of us in this audience. Knowing every sin that I would commit, am committing now, and will commit in the future. Christ died for me. Knowing every sin you have committed, are committing now, and will commit in the future, Christ died for you. This is a profound statement. When Jesus says in the Gospels, it is not the healthy who need a doctor. What does that mean? This. That Christ died for the ungodly. The parable that he tells of the man that goes to the two men that go to the temple. One beats his chest and says, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. And the other one says, thank you, God, that I am better than the rest of these miscreants. That's also what this means. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, the ungodly. Christ died for the ungodly. But I want to backtrack because Paul is going to unpack that statement more here in the next couple of verses. But I want to backtrack into this verse 6 here. At the right time. At the right time. Now, what does this mean? I want to offer up a potential answer to that question. Because I think we have a tendency at times to under-spiritualize things or over-spiritualize things. We have a tendency to say, man, I just lost my job. The devil is after me. When in reality, it's because you showed up late for work 3 days in a row and never called in, and you suck as an employee. You're after you. You're the problem. But then we have a tendency to say, hey, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, do better, know better, be a good moral person, as if we could just do this in our own power. I remember I used to love, is Dr. Laura still on the air? Do you guys know, she still do a show, Laura Schlesinger? Is that still around?
I don't know, honestly.
No
I
idea.
haven't heard that name for a long time.
So, if so, this isn't personal, but I'm going to make this observation because it was one of the most, there were two things that happened early in my salvation where I was like, yeah, I'm really different now. I can just sense, when I started thinking D. James Kennedy was like riveting, I used to come home from college parties drunk at night, turn him on at like 1 a.m. and laugh, okay? And now all of a sudden I'm seeing this guy speaking in this, profound tone, using these big important words, wearing these, ministerial gowns. And now all of a sudden I'm like, I can't get enough of this. Are there DVDs? Just at first I thought, what a fool this guy is. And now I'm like, I can't get enough of this guy. The other was Laura Schlesinger. And man, when I was just a self-righteous right-winger, Christless conservative, I loved me some Dr. Laura. Man, I don't know how much did you guys ever listen to her a lot back in the day?
Yep.
And she would just scream at people, get out, you're a loser, leave him, stop it, right? And I'd be like, yeah. And I remember the first time I turn her on after I get saved, and a young woman calls in. And she is with her second baby daddy, and he's a drug dealer, and he's abusive, and she's like whispering on the phone so he doesn't wake up. And she's trapped, and this woman's broken, absolutely broken. Little secret, by the way. When I wrote A Nefarious Carol, the sequel to A Nefarious Plot, this caller to Dr. Laura's show was one of the composite elements I used to create Ray in the book. That's how much this call in this show stuck with me. And Dr. Laura does her thing, man. Gets on, starts, he's a loser. You have to leave, But I had this weird response now that I did not have before. Empathy. And now I can hear like my own mom in what I grew up in. I can now hear my own mom at that age feeling similar, trapped, nowhere to go. No one will have me. And that if it were possible for her for us to always just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and leave our mistakes behind, we would. And sometimes, in fact, many times, it is not. It is not. This is why it should be encouraging to hear Christ died for the ungodly. Knowing you and I would be incapable to leave our mistakes behind on our own. And would even, like a dog returning to its own vomit, go back to those mistakes over and over and over again. He sits there, tortured beyond recognition, layers of his skin exposed, buck naked in the middle of the day, bleeding out, asphyxiating on a board in the heat of the sun. And he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I know there's at least one person right now in the sound of my voice thinking, you're listening to the enemy whispering in your ear, you're never going to be better than this. You're never going to get beyond this. You've gone too far. Just go all the way. No one will have you. There's no way out. You might as well keep indulging. You're too far gone. You're unlovable. You're unforgivable. There's at least one person in this vast audience right now that I'm talking to when I say this. You know why? Because every single one of us in this audience has been this person at some point. That's why. And knowing how many times you and I would listen to that voice and live by those lies, knowing that in advance, and then knowing how many times, even after we think we've given this up and accepted new life, we are tempted, if not succumb to going back. Christ still died for the ungodly. And I remember for the first time listening to this call thinking, this woman can't leave. She doesn't have the power to do this. There is no self-righteousness. That's a lie every bit as much as victimology. She is literally a prisoner. And Christ is the one who sets the captives free. We can't set ourselves free. Now, whom the Son has set free is free indeed. Once we are set free, we should be walking and seeking to walk in that freedom. But we can't do this on our own. We can't. And I never listened to Dr. Laura's show ever again after that. We can't always pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We can't. In fact, many times we can't. That doesn't mean, by the way, you're entitled to a government subsidy. You're still held accountable for your actions by a holy and righteous God. But that same holy and righteous God who holds you accountable for your actions has offered himself up, his Son up, as a sacrifice on your behalf, so that you can now walk in empathy and freedom and without any condemnation. But that's a choice you have to make. And so this early part of the sentence, when Paul writes at the right time, we'll either under-spiritualize, we can just do this moralistically. We don't need any real spiritual messianic power. Or we'll over-spiritualize, where everything is a spiritual battle, and sometimes it's just you're a moron and accept responsibility for your actions and do better. So let's not either under-spiritualize or over-spiritualize what at the right time means. Here's what I think it could mean. From Babel until this moment in human history, it was impossible to globally export a movement that would challenge the conventional world system of the enemy. It was impossible. Technology did not exist. The shared language and culture that from God destroying the Tower of Babel and dispersing the people and confusing their tongues until now, this moment was the first time that a majority of the known world operated under a singular language and culture. The Greco-Roman culture, and then the Greek and Latin languages therein. Never existed before. Until this moment. This moment was the first time. The Romans came up with nascent proto-versions of paving roads. Because of their dominance globally, they also had some form. Now, these things would all be primitive by our standards, okay? But just to demonstrate how anxious God was to send his son, how anxious Christ was to come and be the lamb slain before the foundations of the world, even when there was a bare bones modicum of secure mass transit via Roman domination of of the transcontinental world and seaways and everything else, even at the most primitive status of those things. That very first possible moment, Messiah comes. There was no concept of mass human transport. We're getting close to Christmas, and you're going to hear this lie, like you hear it every year, that Joseph and Mary were refugees that crossed over an open border into Egypt to escape Herod, and so that's why we have to have open borders and just let everybody in. That's not true. The reason why they could just get up and go to Egypt is Egypt was also under Roman control. It's part of the Roman Empire. The Egyptians weren't any more of a sovereign people than the Judeans were, or the people of Gaul, or the Germania tribes, or the rest of the known world under Roman control. They weren't refugees as we would understand them today. The better analogy would be like the Dukes escaping the county of Boss Hogg and getting across the county line in the same state of Georgia to a more favorable county to them. They weren't refugees. They weren't crossing a Rio Grande. They weren't migrants. They were subjects under the exact same empire. That's why they could travel for the census to take taxes to other parts of the empire as well. Just not true. Egypt was also under Roman control. So this is the first time that if you were going to start a church, if you're going to start a movement that challenged the conventional wisdoms of the enemy's dominion, right? What's the last temptation that the enemy gives to Christ? He offers him the kingdoms of this world. They are his to give. They're his demonic kingdoms. If you were going to start something that challenged these conventional wisdoms and processes and these institutions and could get a message out, so we're pre-mass media, we're still in a third world here. We don't even have running water, let alone internet. No printing presses yet. So this is the first moment in the arc of human history from Babel that it was even remotely possible to create a countercultural global movement that would not get absolutely squashed by the conventional system and could even go global. Did not exist in human history until this moment. So now I want to read this sentence again that Paul writes in light of the context I just gave you, and in light of the local color I added to what it means that Christ died for the ungodly. Take all of that exposition now and insert it as context when I read this verse again. For while we were still weak, at the right time, as soon as he could, as soon as it was possible, God's concept of time is not the same as ours, but just imagine Messiah anxiously waiting and moves the minute, the second that the time is right, and not a second later. God moves and then dies for the ungodly, his enemies, those who hate him, hate his word, hate his people, his enemies. And I would venture to tell you, and I could say this about a lot of verses in this all-time best-selling book, but you are going to have a hard time looking into the religious writings of any other religious movement in the history of this world. And when you apply its historical context, its real-world application, and its transcendent value, you are going to have a hard time coming up with something more powerful than what I just read to you. For while we were still weak, while we were terrible, while we were awful, while we were evil, while we were wicked, at the right time, as soon as he could, as soon as it was possible, as soon as this kind of a countercultural movement could possibly be successful, in spite of all of our weaknesses, Christ comes and dies for us, the ungodly, those who hate him, reject him. Good luck coming up with anything from the Buddha, from Muhammad, from Zoroaster, from anybody, from your humanities professor, from your own seared conscience. Good luck coming up with anything more powerful than that. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
That was so money that it forces me to merely amend one thing you said at the very beginning. And it's being true to Scott Hahn's take on this. Listen, we're not moving beyond faith and works, which is the way you put it early on. And I know what you meant by that, but actually what we're talking about here actually elevates it all the more. Because, as Steve has said out in his own way, works cut both ways. While we were still helpless, faith accomplishing what we can't do for ourselves. But if you don't delve further, that can be like innocent baby doe, something like that, hasn't really done anything. This is where the ungodly comes in. Knowing that we were enemies of God, relentlessly so, elevates, and so we were working against God proudly. And remember, put that into context of Romans 1, going back. We were without excuse. We can't know everything, but we know enough without the revelation of Christ. Right and wrong, and I'll get back to this second. Enemies of God, and he still did this. It's important to talk about faith and works in this context because the negativity of the works being done elevates the definition of this faith all the more. This is me saying in a different way what Steve is all done saying. But remember, Romans 1, similar to C.S. Lewis, mere Christianity, right and wrong is a key, the beginning of understanding right to God, not an end, but we're getting on that road. And this is so important in my second point, the appointed time that Steve talks about. This isn't just about roads or anything like that. This is about the mind. The rational mind, a gift that had been taken for granted for century upon century with the Greeks, was elevated and appreciated as the gift that it is truly of God. But like Steve reminds you many, many times, all these great gifts, I mean, All of the demons are fallen angels. All of the sins we commit are ultimately start with abuses of the gifts God gave us. The appointed time, our mind. Abusing our mind. And this is why this next verse is so important. I have to read just this one next verse because this is what it's talking about. Indeed, only with difficulty does one die for a just person, though perhaps for a good person, one might even find courage to die. That's Greek thinking. That's the rational mind. That makes sense, right? He's talking to you like that, like the Greeks have long doing it. The premise had already gotten into the Roman world. That's the appointed time. Because to that Greek mind, that rational mind, using that gift, the previous sentence makes 0 sense. And it's right to the rational mind. But the rational mind is a gift of God. It isn't God himself. The revelation of God says exactly what Steve says at the end. You were a monster. You were a reprobate, and I loved you nonetheless. So we are moving beyond faith and works. Steve just elevated it all the more, and rightly so.
It's a couple of, especially your exposition, Steve, some profound commentary. And I think when we come back from the break, I'll tease this for now, but R.C. Sproul goes into great detail about the doctrine of original sin, what that actually means, and the misconceptions of original sin, particularly amongst evangelical America in the 21st century. And this notion, R.C. Sproul says, something that's taken for granted amongst evangelical Christianity in America. If he were ever to actually believe this tenet, this misconception that is held, either implicitly or explicitly, he said if he were ever to believe that, that would be the moment that he would have to step down out of his pulpit. Of course, he's deceased and he's passed away now. But that would be the moment that he would have to stop preaching the word of God. And we'll get into that after the break.
I mean, I can't wait to see where that goes when we come back. That's a heck of a tease. All right, so more Theology Thursday coming your way. I mentioned Paul is also going to unpack, all right, what it means that Christ died for the ungodly. Spurgeon's got some things to say about that as well. I mean, that you'll know. I'm going to tell you right now, Allah is never going to tell you he's going to die for the ungodly. Allah is going to tell you, I'm going to make the ungodly die. Totally different religion. More in a moment. Folks, I want you to imagine that you are on the brink of making maybe the biggest financial decision most people are going to make in their lives, either buying or selling a house or both, and what it would mean to not have the right help, but to have the best help available. Imagine what it would be like to not have to worry about whether you were going to be able to find the right contractors to do the repair work, the right photographer, the right mortgage you'll need to make this not only a smooth process, but hopefully also a profitable one. Well, good news. You don't have to imagine because now we've got Real Estate Agents I Trust, which is going to pair you with the best real estate agent in your area, someone who knows and has proven to demonstrate that they can get you the best practices, someone who, if you're thinking about buying or selling a home or both, has proven that they are your closer, your team leader. All right, so please get in touch with them. You'll see what we mean when you go to realestateagentsitrust.com. The name says it all. Realestateagentsitrust.com. Again, that's realestateagentsitrust.com. Realestateagentsitrust.com. All right, Aaron, you gave us quite a tease here on what R.C. Sproul was about to say on Romans 5, verse 6. So that was a heck of a tease, man. So reset that and then give us the payoff.
So R.C. Sproul goes into great detail about the doctrine of original sin, how that intersects with this passage, and a fairly common misnomer, whether it's explicit or implicit, amongst evangelical Christianity in 21st century America. And to reset verse 6, for when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. Paul speaks of the when of this accomplishment in two ways. First is with the respect to us. At what point in our personal history did Christ offer himself on the cross? Let's look at that. One of the cardinal doctrines of biblical Christianity has to do with original sin and its impact on our spiritual strength. This issue has provoked a battle in every generation throughout church history. Sproul goes on to say, Augustine waged this battle in antiquity against the heretic Pelagius, who denied the fall, meaning the original fall, altogether. The cardinal point Augustine taught was that the ravages of sin are so great and penetrate so deeply within our souls that we are left in a state of spiritual death. Spiritual death means that even though we were still alive biologically, even though we still have faculties that remain intact, a brain, a mind, affections, a will, our humanity has been so damaged by the fall that our state by nature is one of moral inability. Sproul writes, the idea of moral inability is this. We've been plunged so deeply into sin that we do not have the moral capacity to incline ourselves in any way to the things of God. If God in his mercy and grace were to offer us complete forgiveness and salvation in Jesus Christ, but do nothing to work in our hearts, we would never exercise that option. We simply do not have the moral capacity. Sproul says the overwhelming report in America today among professing evangelicals is that God offers the gospel to everybody, and that those who exercise their will to receive Jesus, to make a decision for Christ, are the ones who are saved. Although God does 99%, the 1% that decides our fate for eternity rests in our cooperating and choosing Jesus freely. The minute I'm persuaded of that will, the minute I'm persuaded of that will be the last minute I climb down from the pulpit, because I would have no hope whatsoever that the work of evangelism would be successful or that preaching would bring any fruit. I'd be like a preacher preaching the resurrection with great eloquence, power, and rhetorical skills in the middle of a cemetery, calling the corpses back to life. They're not going to come. Unless the Holy Spirit empowers the word of preaching and the outreach of evangelism, no one will come to Christ. That is the point Jesus made when he said, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, in John 6:44. Paul is teaching the same principle. He's saying that Christ died for the ungodly while we were still without strength. That strength that Paul has in view clearly is spiritual strength. We have no strength in and of ourselves to effect salvation. Todd, am I supposed to say, Todd, your thoughts here? No. You can see here he is clearly, and he's a Calvinist, obviously. You can see here, though, the moment he says he needs to hang up his vestments is the moment that he starts to believe that we have any power in and of ourselves, any moral authority or empowerment in and of ourselves to effect salvation. He says if he believes that, evangelism is basically all for naught.
Let's discuss that here in a minute after we talk about our friends over at Paint Your Life. So they came on board a few years ago, and I gave them the oldest picture I have of me and my mama when I am a real little guy and she's a teenage girl. And this picture was pretty worn, man. And I said, hey, what can you guys do with this? Because I think she'd get a real kick out of this as a Christmas gift. And what they did with that picture is absolutely incredible. In fact, there it is right there if you're watching on Blaze TV right now or on YouTube or elsewhere. And my mom, as I suspected, was blown away. So I got serious grown-up son points with that. But if you've got memories that you are thinking are fading and you want them preserved, and of course we're getting into peak gift giving season, this is just these guys are fantastic. And this is a very unique thing for the person you think, I mean, how many more ties can you buy? How many more gift certificates can you get? This is the kind of thing that will stand the test of time and really hit home as well. It transforms your photos into a one-of-a-kind, beautiful, hand-painted portrait by professional artists. So get started with your holiday shopping early this season and give the most meaningful gift you've ever given from paintyourlife.com. And there's no risk. If you don't love the final painting, your money's refunded, guaranteed. You can order now and get your Paint Your Life's early bird holiday offer. That's 20% off. So that's a big discount. For a limited time, get 20% off and free shipping. And we're dealing here with full-size portraits, guys. So that free shipping thing, that's not, a stamp or, $5 for, a UPS package. This is going to be a shipping expense. They're going to waive that too. Okay. So you get 20% off and free shipping with this special offer if you text DACE, my last name, to 87204. That's text DACE to 87204. Text DACE to 87204. That's Paint Your Life. Celebrate the moments that matter the most. So Abraham, does Abraham come forth and say, there must be this unknown God somewhere, I seek you out? Is that what Abram does?
No.
No. Does Moses say, you know what, this shepherding thing, that I've been doing for these last few decades, I mean, I don't know. Let me just walk over to this bush here and I'll just see if I can, talk to it and see if this Jewish God that my ancestors who gave me up, on the river one day were right about this whole thing. Is that what he does?
Nope.
No. How many of the disciples called on Jesus?
Nope.
So over and over and over again, God has to initiate. Now, because of what Paul writes here, we lack the strength to initiate with him. We cannot initiate with him. We are fallen. He has to initiate with us. But here's the thing. He does. That's what he does. He initiates with us. Now, does this mean that God predestines people to salvation and destruction? Both. Okay, that's what Calvin taught. That is probably not what Augustine taught. So there's even different definitions of predestination. We'll get into some of this later on when these topics are broached. But the thing ultimately that matters more than anything in all of these debates is that God must initiate, and God does. That God must initiate, and God does. And to what extent this is a foreknowledge that he has, or it's an act he predestines, is largely irrelevant to us because, number one, we're not entitled to anything from him anyway. So there's no aspect of fairness here. We're not entitled to anything anyway. We're sinners. We will look to get over on our own. Heck, we've been talking. Why have we been talking so much about whether you can lose your salvation or not? Because it's even hard after you claim Christ to not still try to get over on your own. Just ask Stephen Lawson. So, number one, no one is owed anything. No one's been cheated out of anything. No one's been denied anything they wanted. No one has. No one is owed anything. We're ungodly. Number two, we don't have the foreknowledge he does, and we cannot act in a predestinational way as he can. Which means, however you answer those questions, do you think that God used his foreknowledge meant that he looked down through history at those who would choose him, and then that is his remnant, or that he has to completely and unequivocally and solely act as what you just heard R.C. Sproul say, regardless of which of those two theorems you buy into, and there are great preachers and expositors in the history of the church that have been on both sides of this debate. Regardless of which one you or where you're at on somewhere on those spectrums, the reality is we don't have the foreknowledge he does, and we cannot predestinationally act as he can. So we don't know. We have no idea who will either answer the call or has been called. We don't know. Therefore, to his glory, we declare his kingdom and his gospel to all of the earth, because that's what he told us to do. And there are all kinds of people you would have never guessed either will answer the call or were called because we judge on what's on the outside and not what's on the inside. Where I think this debate has become consequential in our era, and when we get to these discussions that are more fleshed out, and we will likely agree or disagree with one another at various points, I can't imagine we will be able to come to some form of conclusiveness over this when the church has debated it within itself for 2 millennia now. But what I am concerned about is that the modern American church has come up with a semi-Pelagian, because that's where we're all going to agree on. Okay, so whether you're in that we ultimately can of our own free will choose to follow Christ or not after we're saved, but to get saved, or whether you believe that we cannot do that and therefore he has to call us as the elect. Both sides of that camp can't stand the dude Pelagius. Okay, because he rejected the doctrines of original sin. He taught that human nature was basically good. So everybody's going to reject that heretic, and then they're going to argue with each other from there. You know who doesn't reject Pelagius? Much of the modern evangelical church doesn't. It preaches as if Pelagius was right. Both pre and post salvation. It'll treat people not as sinners but seekers. And then after salvation, it will treat them not as people in need of discipling, but customers in need of servicing. Pelagius lives in the American megachurch. And again, on our show, a megachurch is not the size of the church. It's the mentality of the church. R.C. Sproul taught at a massive, sprawling campus that bears his name. Charles Spurgeon, the guy I'm going by here, pastored what are still some of the largest churches the city of London's ever seen. So it's not about how many people are at your church. It's the mentality of the church itself. And the mentality of your megachurch is that people are not sinners, they're seekers. And therefore, we never really confront them in their sin. We see if we can find some way to make them feel guilty or bad once, get them to answer an altar call. And then after that point, we don't treat them as sheep in need of discipling. We treat them as customers in need of servicing. Well, we don't want our big donors to leave. We don't want to offend people. Well, we're not going to do Sanctity of Life Sunday anymore because there's women in our church that had abortions, and we drudge all that back up again. Well, we're going to act like there's no election happening because politics is very divisive. These are the kinds of decisions global corporations make. Not a transcendent church. And I think because of that, frankly, we're not afforded the luxury of debating strictly the theology of this debate. Before we decide between Augustine and Calvin and Arminius, we have to kick out Pelagius. Because Pelagius is Pope in many American churches today. Pelagius is. How do you know that? What you just heard Aaron quote from Sproul, you don't even know why you agree or disagree. Many of you won't even know why you agree or disagree with it. It's like a foreign language to you because you've been treated as a customer. You haven't been discipled. So we have to, in my view, we got to kick Pelagius out first because he rules and reigns in much of the megapolises in our suburbs. Let's get some final thoughts here in the final couple minutes we have left, gentlemen. Floor is yours.
I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. And that's why in my way, and you can choose other vehicles, but this is exactly why. I mean it. And it's what I said at the beginning about how you've elevated the FaithWorks discussion. This is why I'm so hard on Sports Bro. Because we don't talk about works in the proper context, faith is also diminished. That's what you're saying, Steve. Mm-hmm. We do not understand the total rescuing of faith. And when we don't deserve it, we think of innocent little lamb, maybe or maybe didn't do anything wrong. No. We're trash. We do evil things all the time, and yet we were rescued from that. It's because we've utterly butchered the faith works discussion. That's why and here we have the land of the sports pros, going to church, the mega church. We've seen those things where it's like football Sunday, everybody dressing. That's a huge problem. That's Pelagius. You are absolutely right.
Ultimately, we are made new creatures in the sun, S-O-N, or we're going to fall for any number of foibles under the sun, because they're S-U-N, because there is nothing new under the sun. You know, it may have new frosting. We've used this as political analogies before. The frosting may look different of the modern American church. The mega church way trademark symbol. The frosting may look different than it did 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. But ultimately, if you start falling for some of the canards that we've talked about, it's just old heresy, new frosting. That's all that it is.
Yes.
And we have to guard, each of us have to guard ourselves of that. There's a reason why these were some of the original heresies, is because they're easy to believe and we want to believe them.
As you've heard me say over the years, the devil just has a greatest hits album. He just keeps re-racking it every generation. Romans 8:28.